The old yellow school bus pulled away from Riverside Academy, leaving behind a trail of dust and the laughter of students heading home to their fancy houses. David Chun watched from the window of the supply closet as the last car disappeared. Down the tree-lined driveway. Finally, it was quiet. He had been working as a custodian at this private school for almost 4 years now, and he knew the routine by heart. Every day at 3:30, the wealthy kids would rush out of their classrooms, grab their designer backpacks, and disappear into their parents' expensive cars. And every day at 3:30, David would emerge from the shadows to begin his real work. The hallways of Riverside Academy were nothing like the public school he had attended as a child. Here, the floors were polished marble, the walls were lined with portraits of distinguished alumni, and every classroom was equipped with the LATST technology. The students who walked these halls came from families who owned businesses, practiced law, or worked in medicine. Their parents paid more for 1 year of tuition than David made in his entire salary, but David didn't mind. He actually loved his job, even though some people might think it was beneath him. There was something peaceful about cleaning the empty classrooms, organizing the library books, and making sure everything was perfect for the next day. The silence gave him time to think, to remember, and sometimes to dream. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, David had been assigned to clean the music hall, and he was both excited and nervous about it. The music hall was the crown jewel of Riverside Academy. It had been built just 2 years ago with money donated by some of the richest families in the city. The room was enormous, with high ceilings, beautiful wooden floors, and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, but what made David's heart race every time he entered that room was the piano. It wasn't just any piano, it was a brand new Steinway grand piano that cost more than most people's cars. The piano belonged to one of the students, a girl named Victoria, whose father owned half the buildings downtown. She was 17, had long blonde hair, and always carried herself like she owned the world. David had seen Victoria play the piano many times during his cleaning rounds. She would sit there during lunch breaks or after school, her fingers dancing across the keys while her friends sat nearby, scrolling through their phones. She was good, David had to admit. Her technique was flawless, probably the result of years of expensive private lessons. But something was missing from her playing. It was technically perfect, but somehow cold, like she was just going through the motions. As David pushed his cleaning cart into the music hall, he felt that familiar tug in his chest. The piano sat in the center of the room like a sleeping giant, its black surface reflecting the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. He had cleaned around this piano hundreds of times, but he had never dared to touch it. He started his usual routine, sweeping the floors and wiping down the chairs. But his eyes kept drifting back to the piano. He remembered the first time he had seen it, how his breath had caught in his throat. It reminded him so much of his grandmother's piano, the one he had learned to play on when he was just 5 years old. His grandmother, Lily, had been a piano teacher in their small town. She had taught lessons in her living room, and David had been her most eager student. Every day after school, he would run to her house and spend hours practicing. His small fingers would stretch to reach the keys, and she would guide his hands, teaching him how to make the piano sing. "Music isn't just about hitting the right notes, sweetheart," she would tell him. "It's about feeling the story the composer wanted to tell. Every piece has a heart, and your job is to find it." David had been 10 years old when his grandmother got sick. The medical bills piled up quickly, and his family couldn't afford to keep the piano. They had to sell it to help pay for her treatment. David remembered the day the men came to take it away. He had sat on the front porch, watching as they loaded his grandmother's beautiful piano onto a truck. That was the last time he had played. His grandmother had died 6 months later, and with her went David's dreams of becoming a musician. His family moved to the city, where his parents worked multiple jobs just to make ends meet. David studied hard in school, but when it came time for college, there was no money for tuition. He had taken the job at Riverside Academy because it paid well and came with health benefits. Now, 20 years later, David found himself staring at a piano that was probably worth more than everything his family had ever owned. He continued, cleaning, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about his grandmother's hands guiding his, about the way she would close her eyes when she played, about the stories she would tell him about the great composer's dot as he dusted the piano bench. David noticed that Victoria had left one of her music books open. It was a piece by Chopin, the same nocturne his grandmother had taught him all those years ago. David's heart began to race. He could almost hear his grandmother's voice, humming the melody as she showed him how to play it. He looked around the empty music hall. The security cameras were pointed at the doors, not at the piano. The hallways were silent. Everyone had gone home for the day. David set down his cleaning supplies and stood in front of the piano. His hands were shaking slightly. As he reached out and touched the keys, the sound was incredible. Even just pressing one key, David could tell this piano was special. The note rang out clear and pure, filling the entire room with its warmth. It was nothing like the old, out-of-tune piano at the community center where he sometimes went to practice late at night when no one was around. David looked at the sheet music again. He could still remember every note of this piece. His grandmother had made him practice it over and over until he could play it with his eyes closed. This piece is about longing, she had told him. It's about missing someone you love. When you play it, think about how much you miss them and let that feeling flow through your fingers. He knew he shouldn't do it. He knew it was wrong to touch a student's piano without permission. But something deeper than logic was pulling him toward the keys. It had been so long since he had played on a real piano, since he had felt that connection. Between his heart and the music, David sat down on the bench and placed his fingers on the keys. For a moment, he just sat there, feeling the familiar weight of his hands in position. Then slowly he began to play. The first notes of the nocturne filled the room, and suddenly David was 10 years old again, sitting next to his grandmother in her living room, learning to make music with his heart. The years seemed to melt away as David played. His fingers remembered every note, every subtle change in dynamics, every emotion that Chopin had woven into the music. This wasn't just technical playing, this was storytelling. This was his grandmother's voice speaking through his hands, telling the story of love and loss, and the beauty that could be found in sadness. David closed his eyes and let the music carry him away. For these few precious minutes, he wasn't a custodian at a fancy private school. He was a musician sharing his gift with the world, just like his grandmother had always believed he would. The music flowed from David's fingers like water from a spring. Each note seemed to carry 20 years of stored emotion, 20 years of missed opportunities and silent dreams. The Chopin Nocturne had always been his favorite piece, and now, playing it on this magnificent piano, he felt like he was having a conversation with his grandmother's spirit. His eyes were closed, and he was completely lost in the music. The melody danced through the empty hall, bouncing off the high ceilings and wooden floors. This wasn't just playing, this was pure expression. Every phrase told a story, every pause spoke volumes. David's hands moved with a grace and confidence. That seemed to surprise even him. He had forgotten how good it felt to play a real piano. The keys responded to his touch perfectly, allowing him to create the subtle changes in volume and tone that made the music come alive. When he played softly, the notes whispered like secrets. When he pressed harder, they sang with power and passion. This piano was an instrument worthy of the music he carried in his heart. As David played, his mind drifted back to all those lessons with his grandmother. He could almost smell her lavender perfume, almost hear her gentle voice guiding him through the difficult passages. "Remember, sweetheart," she would say, "the music is already inside you. The piano is just helping you let it out." The piece was building to its emotional climax when David heard something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps. Someone was walking down the hallway outside the music hall. David's fingers froze on the keys and the beautiful music stopped abruptly. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He sat perfectly still, hoping whoever it was would just walk past. Maybe it was another custodian, or maybe it was a teacher who had forgotten something. David held his breath and waited. The footsteps seemed to pause right outside the door, and David felt like he might faint from fear. Then he heard a key turning. In the lock, someone was coming in. David's mind raced as he tried to figure out what to do. Should he pretend he was just cleaning the piano? Should he try to hide? There was nowhere to go, and his cleaning cart was sitting right there beside the piano. There was no way to deny what he had been doing. The door opened slowly, and David turned to see who had caught him. To his surprise, it was Victoria, the girl who owned the piano. She was standing in the doorway, her backpack slung over her shoulder, staring at him with wide eyes. David had expected anger, but her expression was something else entirely. She looked shocked, yes, but also amazed. I forgot my music theory book, Victoria said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I heard someone playing and I thought. She trailed off, still staring at David. David quickly stood up from the piano bench, his face burning with embarrassment. I'm so sorry, miss. I know I shouldn't have touched your piano. I was just cleaning and I saw the sheet music and... He was stumbling over his words, trying to explain the unexplainable, but Victoria wasn't angry. She was still looking at him with that amazed expression. How long have you been playing? She asked. David didn't know what to say. He had expected to be yelled at, maybe even fired. He hadn't expected a question about his musical background. I learned when I was a child. My grandmother taught me. But I haven't played in years, really. I sometimes practice at the community center, but their piano is old and out of tune. Victoria took a step closer, and David noticed something he had never seen before. Her usual confident, almost arrogant demeanor was gone. She looked vulnerable, almost shy. That piece. The Chopin Nocturne. I've been working on it for months. My teacher says I play it correctly, but... She hesitated, as if she was afraid to say what she was thinking. But? David prompted gently. But it doesn't sound like that when I play it, Victoria admitted. It doesn't sound like ... It has a soul. David was stunned. This wealthy girl, who seemed to have everything handed to her, was standing here talking to him like he was an equal. Like his opinion mattered. Music isn't just about playing the right notes, he said, echoing his grandmother's words. It's about feeling the story the composer wanted to tell. Victoria nodded eagerly. Yes, that's exactly what I mean. When you were playing just now, I could feel the story. I could feel the sadness and the beauty and the longing. When I play it, it just sounds like I'm reading a grocery list. David couldn't help but smile at her comparison. Your technique is very good, he said honestly. I've heard you play during lunch breaks. You have excellent form and timing. But that's not enough, is it? Victoria said. There's something missing. David thought about how to explain it. When I was learning this piece, my grandmother told me to think about missing someone I loved. She said Chopin wrote it during a difficult time in his life, when he was separated from someone important to him. The music is about that feeling of longing, that bittersweet sadness when you love someone you can't be with. Victoria was listening intently, hanging on every word. I've never really missed anyone like that, she said quietly. I mean, I've been sad when friends moved away, but I don't think I've ever felt that deep kind of longing. That's okay, David said. You don't have to have experienced the exact same thing the composer did. You just need to find something in your own life that makes you feel that same type of emotion. Maybe it's missing a pet that died, or feeling lonely even when you're surrounded by people, or wanting something you can't have. Victoria was quiet for a moment, thinking. Could you play it again? She asked. I want to listen more carefully this time. David hesitated. He was still worried about getting in trouble, but something in Victoria's voice made him want to help her. Are you sure? I don't want to get you in trouble for letting me play your piano. It's fine, Victoria said quickly. I want to hear it again, please. David sat back down at the piano, still not quite believing this was happening. Just a few minutes ago, he had been terrified of being caught. Now he was being asked to play by the very person he had been afraid would catch him. He placed his fingers on the keys and began the piece again. This time, he played with even more emotion, knowing that Victoria was listening and trying to learn. He thought about his grandmother, about all the years he had missed playing, about the dreams he had given up. All of that feeling poured into the music. Victoria sat down in one of the chairs nearby, watching his hands and listening with complete attention. David could feel her presence, but it didn't make him nervous. If anything, it inspired him to play better. He had forgotten what it felt like to share music with someone, to have an audience that truly appreciated what he was doing. When he finished, Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "That was incredible," she finally said. "I could feel every emotion you were talking about. The longing, the sadness, the beauty in the sadness." "How do you do that?" David turned to face her. "I think about my grandmother. She died when I was 10, and I miss her every day. When I play this piece, I'm not just playing notes on a page. I'm having a conversation with her memory." Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "I wish I could play like that." "You can," David said. "You have the technical skills. You just need to find your own emotional connection to the music." Victoria looked thoughtful. Would you Would you be willing to help me? I know it's a strange request, but I've been stuck on this piece for so long, and my regular teacher just keeps telling me to practice more, but I think I need to understand it differently." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. This wealthy student was asking him, a custodian, to help her with music. It was the last thing he had expected when he sat down at the piano tonight. David stared at Victoria, trying to process what she had just asked. A student at this prestigious academy wanted him to help her with music? It seemed impossible, like something out of a dream. But the hopeful look in her eyes told him she was completely serious. I don't know if that's a good idea," David said slowly. "I'm just the custodian here. If anyone found out, I could lose my job?" Victoria's face fell slightly, but she didn't give up. "What if we met after school when everyone's gone? Just for a few minutes?" "I promised no one would know." David felt torn. Part of him wanted to help her more than anything. It had been so long since he had talked to someone about music, since he had felt useful for something other than cleaning floors. But the practical side of him knew how risky it would be. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "But right now, I really should get back to cleaning. And you should probably get home. Your parents might be worried." Victoria nodded, understanding. She gathered her things and headed toward the door. But just as she reached it, she turned back. "David, thank you for letting me listen. That was the most beautiful music I've ever heard." After she left, David sat alone in the music hall, his mind racing. He couldn't believe what had just happened. For a few minutes, he had felt like a real musician again, not just someone who cleaned up after other people's dreams. The next few days passed normally. David went about his usual routine, cleaning classrooms and hallways, but his thoughts kept drifting back to that evening in the music hall. He found himself listening for piano music whenever he was near the music hall, hoping to hear Victoria practicing. On Thursday afternoon, David was cleaning the windows in the main hallway when he heard voices coming from the music hall. Victoria was there with some of her friends, and they were talking loudly. David couldn't help but listen as he worked. "I still can't believe you're struggling with that piece," one of the girls was saying. "It's not even that difficult. Maybe you need a better teacher." "My teacher is fine," Victoria replied, but David could hear the frustration in her voice. I can't seem to get it right." "Well, maybe you're just not cut out for piano," another voice said with a laugh. Not everyone can be musical. David felt his jaw clench. He knew Victoria was talented. She just needed someone to help her connect with the music emotionally, not technically. Friday evening came, and David was assigned to clean the music hall again. As he entered the room, he was surprised to find Victoria sitting at the piano, staring at the sheet music with a dejected expression. "I thought you would have gone home by now," David said gently. Victoria looked up, and David could see that she had been crying. "I can't do it," she said quietly. "I've been practicing for hours, and it still sounds wrong. My friends think I'm not musical, and maybe they're right." David set down his cleaning supplies and walked over to the piano. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the bench. Victoria moved over to make room, and David sat beside her. "Play it for me," he said. "Let me hear what you're struggling with." Victoria placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Technically, it was perfect. Every note was correct, every rhythm was precise, but just as she had said before, it sounded flat and emotionless. "That was very good," David said when she finished. "Your technique is excellent, but it doesn't sound like when you play it," Victoria said, her voice breaking slightly. "It doesn't have any feeling." David was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to help her. "Can I ask you something personal?" Victoria nodded. "Have you ever felt really lonely? Even when you're surrounded by people?" Victoria looked surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I heard your friends talking the other day. They didn't sound very supportive when you were struggling with this piece. Do you ever feel like nobody really understands you?" Victoria's eyes widened, and for a moment David thought she might start crying again. "How did you know?" she whispered. "Because that's the feeling this piece is about," David said gently. "It's not just about missing someone who's far away. It's about feeling isolated, about having all these deep emotions that you can't share with anyone." Victoria was quiet, absorbing what he had said. "I do feel that way sometimes," she admitted. "Like I'm living behind a wall and nobody can see the real me. My friends only care about shopping and parties and who's dating who. When I try to talk about music or books or anything meaningful, they look at me like I'm weird." David nodded. "That's the feeling you need to put into the music. That loneliness, that longing to connect with someone who really understands you." Just then, the door to the music hall burst open. David's heart stopped as he saw who was coming in. It was Jake, one of Victoria's classmates, followed by two other students David recognized. They were all looking at their phones and laughing about something. "Victoria!" "There you are," Jake called out. "We've been looking everywhere for you. Why are you still here so late?" Then Jake noticed David sitting at the piano next to Victoria. His expression changed immediately from friendly to confused, then to something uglier. "What's the custodian doing at your piano?" Jake asked, his voice full of suspicion. David quickly stood up, his face burning with embarrassment. "I was just cleaning," he said, moving toward his cart, but Jake wasn't satisfied with that answer. "Were you playing Victoria's piano?" he demanded. "Jake, it's fine," Victoria said quickly. He was just what?" Jake interrupted. "Victoria, you can't let the help touch your stuff. Do you know how expensive that piano is?" The other students started laughing. "Can you imagine?" one of them said. "The janitor thinks he can play piano?" "This is hilarious," the third student chimed in. "Wait until everyone hears about this." David felt his face getting hotter. He grabbed his cleaning supplies and started pushing his cart toward the door. "I should go," he mumbled, but Jake wasn't done. "Hold on there, buddy," he said, blocking David's path. "I think we need to report this to the principal. Students pay good money to go to this school, and we can't have the staff messing with our property." "Jake, stop it," Victoria said, standing up from the piano bench. "You're being ridiculous." "I'm being ridiculous?" Jake laughed. "Victoria, this guy probably doesn't even know what a piano is, let alone how to play one. He's a custodian. He cleans toilets for a living." The other students burst out laughing again. David felt like he was going to be sick. All the confidence he had felt while playing, all the joy he had experienced in sharing music with Victoria was crumbling around him. "You should stick to what you know," Jake continued, enjoying the audience. "Mops and brooms, not musical instruments." "That's enough," Victoria said, her voice sharp with anger. But the damage was done. David could see the other students pulling out their phones, probably to record this humiliation or text their friends about it. "I really need to go," David said quietly, trying to push past Jake. "Yeah, you do," Jake said with a smirk. "And stay away from things that don't belong to you." As David finally made it to the door, he heard Jake addressing Victoria. "Seriously, Victoria, you can't encourage this kind of behavior. These people need to know their place." David didn't wait to hear Victoria's response. He hurried down the hallway, his heart pounding with shame and anger. In just a few minutes, his beautiful moment of connection with Victoria had been destroyed by her cruel classmates. He spent the rest of the evening cleaning mechanically, trying not to think about what had happened. But he couldn't stop hearing Jake's words. These people need to know their place. David had thought for just a moment that his place might be at a piano, sharing the gift his grandmother had given him. But Jake had reminded him of the truth. He was just a custodian, and custodians didn't play piano. By the time David finished his shift, he had convinced himself that he would never touch that piano again. It had been foolish to think that someone like Victoria could really see him as anything more than the hired help. The whole thing had been a mistake, and he wouldn't make it again. But as he was leaving the building, he couldn't help but wonder what Victoria had said after he left. Had she defended him, or had she joined in with her friend's laughter? He tried to tell himself it didn't matter, but deep down he knew it did. David barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Jake's mocking laughter and the cruel words echoing in his head. These people need to know their place. The phrase cut deeper than any physical wound could have. He had worked so hard to build a life of dignity, to find pride in his work, even if it wasn't glamorous. But in just a few minutes, those students had made him feel smaller than he had in years. The next morning, David arrived at work earlier than usual. He wanted to avoid any chance of running into Victoria or her friends. As he walked through the empty hallways, he made a silent promise to himself. He would stay invisible, do his job, and never again let himself believe he could be anything more than what he was. But staying invisible proved harder than he expected. Word of the incident had spread through the school like wildfire. As students arrived for morning classes, David could hear them whispering and giggling in the hallways. Some of them pointed at him as he pushed his cart past their lockers. He heard fragments of conversations. "Can you believe it? A custodian trying to play piano. How embarrassing." David kept his head down and focused on his work. He had dealt with worse things in his life. This too would pass. People would find something new to talk about, and eventually everyone would forget about the custodian who had dared to touch a student's piano during lunch break. David was cleaning the bathrooms when he heard his name being called over the school's intercom system. "David Chun, please report to the principal's office immediately." His stomach dropped. This was it. Jake had followed through on his threat to report him. The walk to the principal's office felt like the longest journey of David's life. Other students stared at him as he passed, some smirking, others looking curious about what trouble the custodian had gotten himself into. David's hands were shaking as he knocked on the office door. "Come in," called a stern voice from inside. "Principal." Thompson was a tall, serious man who had been running Riverside Academy for over 15 years. He sat behind his large wooden desk, his hands folded, looking at David with an expression that was impossible to read. "Sit down, David," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. David sat down, his heart pounding. He waited for the principal to speak, dreading what was coming next. "I understand there was an incident yesterday evening in the music hall," Principal Thompson began. "Several students have reported that you were playing one of the pianos without permission." David felt his throat tighten. "Yes, sir, I'm very sorry. I know I shouldn't have touched the piano. It won't happen again." Principal Thompson studied David's face for a long moment. "Why did you do it?" The question caught David off guard. He had expected anger, threats, maybe even immediate termination. He hadn't expected curiosity. I used to play when I was younger," David said quietly. "My grandmother taught me. I saw the sheet music and I remembered the piece and I just I missed playing, but I know it was wrong." "And you're quite skilled, from what I understand," Principal Thompson said. David looked up, surprised. "Sir, Victoria Montgomery came to see me this morning," the principal explained. "She had some very interesting things to say about your musical abilities." David's heart sank. He had hoped Victoria might defend him, but he hadn't expected her to get involved with the administration. "Whatever she said, I don't want to cause any trouble for her. This is my fault." Principal Thompson leaned back in his chair. "She told me that you played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major with more skill and emotion than she's ever heard. She said you helped her understand the piece in a way that months of expensive private lessons couldn't accomplish." David didn't know what to say. This conversation was not going at all the way he had expected. She also told me about the way her classmates treated you, Principal Thompson continued. Their behavior was completely unacceptable. I've already spoken with Jake and the other students involved. They will be serving detention for the rest of the week. David felt a wave of relief wash over him. Thank you, sir. But I still shouldn't have touched the piano without permission. No, you shouldn't have, Principal Thompson agreed. But I'm curious about something. How long have you been playing piano? I started when I was 5, David said. My grandmother was a piano teacher. She taught me until we had to sell the piano when I was 10. And you've been playing since then? Whenever I can find a piano to practice on, David admitted. There's an old one at the community center, but it's usually broken or out of tune. I don't get to play very often. Principal Thompson was quiet for a moment, thinking. David, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. If you could do anything with your life, what would it be? The question hit David. Like a physical blow, no one had asked him that in years. He had learned to push down those dreams, to accept that they were impossible. I would teach music, he said quietly. I would help people learn to play piano, the way my grandmother helped me. Principal Thompson nodded slowly. I thought so. Victoria mentioned that you have a natural gift for teaching. She said you helped her understand music in a way that made perfect sense. David looked up, confused. I don't understand, sir. Am I being fired? No, David, you're not being fired. In fact, I have a proposition for you. Just then, there was a soft knock on the office door. Come in, Principal Thompson called. The door opened, and Victoria walked in. She looked nervous but determined. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said. But I wanted to make sure David was okay. Actually, your timing is perfect, Principal Thompson said. I was just about to discuss something with David, and I think you should be here for this conversation. Victoria sat down in the chair next to David. She gave him a small, encouraging smile, and David felt some of his tension ease. David, Principal Thompson began. As you know, our music program is very important to this school. We have excellent facilities and dedicated teachers. But we've been looking for ways to enhance our program, to offer our students something more than just technical training. David wasn't sure where this was going, but he listened carefully. Victoria has convinced me that what our students need is someone who can teach them not just how to play the notes, but how to connect with the music emotionally. Someone who can help them find their own voice as musicians. I would love to help, David said, but I don't have any formal teaching credentials. I'm just a custodian. Your job title doesn't define your abilities, Principal Thompson said firmly. Victoria has given me a very detailed account of how you helped her understand the Chopin piece. Your approach is exactly what some of our students need, Victoria nodded enthusiastically. David, what you taught me in just a few minutes was more valuable than months of regular lessons. You helped me understand that music isn't just about perfect technique. It's about expressing something real and meaningful. David felt tears forming in his eyes. I don't know what to say. Here's what I'm proposing, Principal Thompson continued. We would like to offer you a position as a music mentor. You would continue your custodial duties, but you would also work with students who are struggling to connect with their music emotionally. It would be a part-time position with additional pay. David stared at both of them, unable to believe what he was hearing. You want me to teach music here at Riverside Academy? We want you to share your gift, Victoria said softly. The same way your grandmother shared hers with you. David thought about his grandmother, about all the lessons she had taught him, about the dreams he had given up so many years ago. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe those dreams could still come true, just in a different way than he had imagined. I would be honored, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. Principal Thompson smiled. Excellent. We'll start with a trial period. Victoria has volunteered to be your first student, and I'm sure word will spread quickly about your unique teaching approach. As David left the principal's office, he felt like he was walking on air. The hallways that had seemed so hostile that morning now felt full of possibility. Students still stared at him, but now David stood a little taller. He wasn't just the custodian anymore. He was going to be a teacher. 3 months had passed since that life-changing day in Principal Thompson's office, and David could barely recognize his own life. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, after his regular custodial duties were finished, he would transform from David the janitor into David the music mentor. The small practice room next to the main music hall had become his teaching space, and it was quickly becoming the most popular place in the school. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. Victoria had been David's first official student, and within 2 weeks, she was playing the Chopin Nocturne with such emotion that her regular piano teacher asked what had changed. When Victoria explained about David's unique approach to teaching, other students started asking questions. At first, only a few brave students had signed up for sessions with David. Some came out of genuine curiosity, others because they were struggling with pieces just like Victoria had been. But as word spread about the incredible progress students were making, the waiting list grew longer each week. David remembered his first official lesson with Victoria like it was yesterday. She had arrived at the practice room nervous and excited, carrying the same Chopin sheet music that had started their unlikely friendship. "I've been practicing what you taught me," she had said, sitting down at the small upright piano, "but I want to make sure I really understand it." When she played that evening, the transformation was remarkable. The music flowed from her fingers, with genuine emotion, each phrase telling a story of longing and hope. David had felt tears in his eyes, not just because of the beautiful music, but because he realized his grandmother's teachings were living on through him. "That was incredible," he had told Victoria when she finished. "You found your connection to the music." "I found more than that," Victoria had replied. "I found confidence. For the first time, I'm not just playing notes someone else wrote. I'm expressing something that comes from inside me." That was when David truly understood the impact he could have. It wasn't just about teaching technique or helping students play pieces correctly. He was helping them discover their own voices, their own emotional connections to music. Now, 3 months later, David had 12 regular students. There was Tommy, a shy 8th grader who had struggled with stage fright until David taught him to think of performing as telling a story to friends rather than showing off to strangers. There was Lisa, a senior who had been ready to quit piano altogether until David helped her understand that making mistakes was part of learning, not a sign of failure. Each student brought their own challenges, and David found himself drawing on not just his musical knowledge but his life experiences. When Rebecca, a sophomore, complained that a piece was too difficult, David shared the story of how his grandmother had taught him that every difficult piece was just a puzzle waiting to be solved, one small section at a time, the most surprising. Development had been with Jake, the same student who had humiliated David that evening months ago. 3 weeks into the new semester, Jake had sheepishly approached David after school. "I heard you're helping students with piano," Jake had said, not quite meeting David's eyes. "I've been struggling with this piece for my recital, and my teacher says I need to find more expression in my playing." David had been shocked. This was the same young man who had mocked him and told him to know his place. But David remembered his grandmother's words about giving second chances and seeing the best in people. "I'd be happy to help," David had said simply. Working with Jake had been challenging at first. The boy was talented but had been taught to focus only on perfection, never on feeling. David had spent weeks helping him understand that music was about communication, not just performance. The breakthrough came when David asked Jake to think about a time when he had felt misunderstood. Jake had opened up about the pressure he felt from his parents to be perfect at everything, to never show weakness or vulnerability. When he played his recital piece with that emotion, the change was dramatic. "I never knew music could feel like this," Jake had said after that lesson. "I thought it was just about impressing people." "Music is about connecting with people," David had replied. "When you play with genuine emotion, you're sharing a piece of your soul with everyone who listens." By the end of their sessions together, Jake had become one of David's most enthusiastic supporters. He had even apologized publicly for his behavior. That night, telling other students that David was the best teacher he had ever had, the success of David's teaching program had not gone unnoticed by the school administration. Principal Thompson had been so impressed with the students' progress that he had offered David a full-time position as an assistant music teacher for the following school year. David would still help with some custodial duties, but his primary role would be teaching. "You've brought something to our music program that we didn't even know we were missing," Principal Thompson had told him. "Our students are not just better musicians now, they're more confident, more expressive, more willing to take risks in their art." David had accepted the position with gratitude and excitement. For the first time since his grandmother's death, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, but perhaps the most meaningful change had been in David's relationship with Victoria. She had become not just his student, but his friend and advocate. She regularly attended his teaching sessions with other students, helping to create a supportive environment where everyone felt safe to make mistakes and try new approaches. "You've changed my whole relationship with music," Victoria had told him recently. "But more than that, you've taught me about seeing people for who they really are, not just their job titles or social status." Victoria had also convinced her father to donate money for a new piano for David's teaching room. When the beautiful baby grand arrived, David had sat alone in the room for an hour, just running his hands over the keys and thinking about his grandmother. The evening of the spring concert had been the real test of David's teaching methods. All of his students were performing, and the music hall was packed with parents, teachers, and fellow students. David sat in the back, nervous but proud, watching as each of his students took the stage. Victoria performed the Chopin Nocturne that had brought them together, and David had never heard it played more beautifully. The audience was completely silent during her performance, captivated by the emotion in every note. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Tommy played a Mozart sonata with confidence David never would have imagined possible. Lisa performed a contemporary piece that brought many in the audience to tears. And Jake, the boy who had once mocked David's musical abilities, played a Beethoven sonata with such passion and vulnerability that David felt his grandmother's presence in the room. After the concert, parents and teachers approached David with congratulations and thanks. "You've given these children something special," one parent said. "My daughter has never been happier with her music." As David cleaned up after the concert that night, Victoria found him in the music hall. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a wrapped package. Inside was a framed photo of his grandmother that David had mentioned in one of their conversations. Somehow, Victoria had tracked down the image from his family. "I wanted you to have this for your new office," Victoria said. "She should be there with you while you teach." David looked at his grandmother's smiling face in the photo and felt tears streaming down his cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered. "She would have loved to see what her lessons have become." "She can see," Victoria said softly. "Every time you teach someone to find their voice in music, she's there. Every time you help a student discover that they have something beautiful to share with the world, her legacy continues." David placed the photo on the piano and sat down at the bench. He began to play the Chopin Nocturne, the piece that had started this incredible journey. As the music filled the empty hall, he thought about how much his life had changed. He was still David Chun, still humble, still grateful for every opportunity. But now he was also a teacher, a mentor, and a keeper of his grandmother's musical wisdom. The last notes of the nocturne faded into silence, and David smiled. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to share the gift of music. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. "Music is already inside you, sweetheart. Your job is just to help it come out."